Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back for an instant reaction podcast for the Tip Sheet. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020. And joining me on a night where the Eels got their asses whooped, black and blue, I suppose is probably the nicest way of putting it, is my good mate Sixties. Big fella, not enough fire, not enough, commitment, not enough effort. I don't know. But Eels did not back up from their Easter Monday loss to the West Tigers. That's suffice to say.
Well, you know what? Almost would have been happy if they had have backed up and played the same as they did against the West Tigers, because this was a step backwards. And
a step is generous as well.
Yeah. Well, maybe several steps backwards. Let me correct that. Look, it's very disappointing as an Eels supporter. It's the sort of game where you question how much wearing the jersey means to a team. And that's a harsh thing to say. And maybe it's an unfair thing to say, but there were some efforts out there that just were, they should result in being in lower grade football for some of the players, but when both of the lower grades are sitting 0 and 5 and you've got a roster of 27 with players in that 27 who are either injured or not capable of playing first grade, it has me fearing the worst for this season. And I hate to sound dramatic with that, but what else can you feel after a day like today? It's impossible to put in context. Look, I'll go straight out and saying that I thought it was one of those days where the officiating was a bit ordinary, where every bounce of the ball favoured one team. But if you didn't think that the Raiders were a 40-point better team than us, then you weren't watching the game that I was watching, because that's just the plain fact.
The funny part is that the officiating was comically terrible, but it still was a complete non-factor on the result. Like they could have, there was a string of terrible calls that went against Parramatta that we had to either challenge or cop on the chin. And even if they'd all gone our way initially, it still wouldn't have impacted the result whatsoever. But it just shows you the standard of NRL officiating in a bubble there. 60s, I want to say that it's unfair to sully the fine sponsors of our show. They put them in the same sentence as the effort that we saw tonight. But it is a reminder that the tip sheet is brought to you by a couple of fine sponsors in Big Swing Golf, Northmead, and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn Rowan and Parramatta. I don't know if they want to be in the same sentence as the Eels or the same podcast as the Eels this week, but I'm going to throw them in there and give them our thanks as always. But in this one, let's go through the tail of the tape very quickly. Canberra Raiders.
Even before you do, John, can you hit the stinger? Because I think it just deserves a stinger overall.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
Which I think fairly encapsulates Parramatta's effort here. But yeah, as I run through the tail of the tape, 60s, it is not pretty reading, as you can imagine. Scoreline 41-8 to the Canberra Raiders. And I got to say, shame on you, Canberra, for not putting 50 on this bunch of Muppets that rolled out for the Parramatta Eels this week. But try scorers for the Raiders: Sebastian Chris, Xavier Savage, Matthew Tomoko bagging a double, Danny Levi, James Schiller, and Hudson Young. Jamal Fogarty had a rough start to the kicking responsibilities, but ended up going 4 from 7, tacking on 2 penalties and a field goal as well. So he was busy with that right boot. For the Parramatta Eels, Mike Acevo didn't do much on the field, but he did score a couple of tries, I suppose. And Garfo sprayed both kicks to the right, so the Eels getting their points by way of those 2 Sevo tries down the left edge. Canberra absolutely dominating possession. It actually came back a bit in the end. They were up 62, 63% deep into the second half, 60s, but finished this game with 56% of the ball, plus 6.5 minutes time of possession. Both teams completing in the same vicinity, although obviously the weight of possession vastly different. 78% for the Raiders, 75% for the Parramatta Eels. Canberra plus 6 on the line breaks, plus 17 on the tackle busts. Faster play the ball by nearly half a second. Out offloaded the Eels. Diffused the ball better than the Eels. Tackled better than the Eels. Made less negative play. Oh, they actually made more errors than Parramatta Eels, believe it or not, but conceded 7 less penalties than the Blue and Gold. There is no surprise that the stats are that one-sided. Canberra had 3 of their backline go over 200 on the ground. Schiller, Tomoko, and Savage all going for the double ton. In their forwards, had a few guys going across 150 as well. Tapano just short of that, but Hudson Young and Morgan Smithies both in excess of 150 metres for the Parramatta Eels. On the flip side, it's not good reading. Bailey Simonson, the pick of the outside backs by a considerable margin, 14 carries, 144 metres. He actually got some production on the ground. Reg and Sean Lane and Jermaine Hopgood just tickling over 100 metres per person. No one on the bench really getting close. And I suppose the big one, and you talk about overcorrections, and we can talk about that later, 60s, is that Fox Sports had Dylan, and NRL.com has Dylan down for 16 carries and 90 metres, but Fox Sports in their coverage were saying that Dylan had made 3 runs deep into the second half. So I'm not sure why there's a discrepancy there, but it did feel like Dylan was sort of overcorrecting what he and the team did against the Tigers last week, and not running the ball with as much intent as he did last week. We can talk about that later, but yeah, in terms of missed tackles, it's not pretty reading either. Double-digit missed tackles for the entire starting team, except for Jermaine Hopgood, who has 0 missed tackles credited to him right now with 44 tackles. So fair play to Jermaine. Actually, someone that defended well, but yeah, and it's not good reading. There's a pretty serious conversation needs to be held for coaches, for players, for footy staff about how the Eels want to handle this season, because today was unacceptable. Backing up from a loss against the Tigers where there was a lack of focus, direction and intent, they served this one up. And I get that Mitchell Moses being out is a huge handicap for this team, and Bryce Cartwright being out weakens a right edge even more. But that doesn't excuse us for forgetting football fundamentals and getting the rugby league equivalent of ADD every time we get into the red zone and dropping balls and doing silly kicks, or not understanding that we got away for knock on and the referee didn't see it, so do not play for a try. Like, why on earth would you allow the bunker to come in and intervene when Quentin Gufferson clearly is knocked on and you get away with it? So I am to say I don't know if this is, I'm not angry, I'm disappointed. I think we're a step beyond that now. This is the white hot rage that just seethes under the surface.
Yeah, John, as you know, today wasn't a great day for me around football, and I get hammered with DMs and text messages during a game, and that's fine. I make a choice about whether I answer them or not. Most of the time when a game's on, I don't answer them. And I'm even talking about when the Eels are winning. When the Eels are losing, you can imagine what it's like to be on the receiving end of just a barrage of vitriol about the club. And sometimes I think people think that I have something to do with team selections or that I defend the club when it shouldn't be defended. But, I'm there reading the messages that are coming through, and I can only imagine and I'm not going to go and look it up, I can only imagine the sort of messages that are being put on the club's social media right now. And I'm not saying that I disagree with how people feel about this. I'm actually, the performance was so bad today that I'm almost lost for words. All I can say is, watching it, that we were beaten for energy. We were beaten for physical contact. We weren't even in the same universe when it came to the pace of the game. And as far as being able to compete for speed with with opposing backlines, well, we're in trouble. And we've spoken about it before. We have both lower grades sitting at 0 and 5 this season. That means that there have been 3 occasions out of the first 5 rounds where the Eels have lost all 3 grades against an opponent. And we spoke about it beforehand, but in the Jersey Flegg, and I should mention as well that the Jersey Flegg went down today, although the scoreline was nothing like what I thought or what I feared it might be, because the Raiders were undefeated and the Eels went down 22-16 against them. But we had 2 back rowers playing in the centres in Jersey Flegg. In New South Wales Cup, we had 3 players who don't sit inside the top 30 or the development squad as starters in the back line. And you just have to think this is only round 5. We've got 27, by my calculations, 27 players on the roster. Now, if we were to lose any of the backline players that are playing first grade right now, and let's be brutally honest, there are players in the first grade backline who probably may not be selected in first grade at other clubs, such as the Form at the moment. But if we were to lose those players, I don't know what the options are, John. We don't know what's happening with regard to adding to the roster, but surely we can't go any further. We can't let more weeks pass with only 27 players there and essentially minimal options for BA to drop players and bring someone up. I mean, where do we go from here, John? In all seriousness.
I mean, there are clearly roster issues, and it's something we've spoken about podcast after podcast, especially in the back line and the depth options there. But a lot of the issues also would be not completely fixed, but rectified a huge degree by our players respecting basic football stuff, like Rugby League 101, about, proper defensive lines instead of staggered, guys shooting up and creating opportunities for Ethan Strange to step back in and create a line gap, or holding on to the bloody ball. This isn't the worst loss the Eels have had in recent years, or in Brad Arthur's tenure. There's I think there was a game against Manly. There was obviously the Melbourne Storm Magic round 1. We've been pasted before, but whenever you see the breakdown of footy fundamentals like this, it just gets you so upset as a fan. And like I said, this goes to the administrative, the coaching, and the players, or all 3 tiers. Like, everyone needs to take their share of responsibility here, because that doesn't happen without all 3 prongs or branches not upholding their end of the deal. And in terms of the players, they're the ones that we always level the most accountability at, because they are the guys out there either succeeding or failing, and they're the ones that cop it the most from fans, and that rightfully or wrongfully, that's how it is. But yeah, even in this game, I thought, we mentioned in our preview that Brad took a risk on Micah Sevo this week, and I think he made the wrong call. Like, that was in advance, and I think we've been proven that he made a wrong call there. Micah was diabolical. He wasn't Robinson Crusoe on defense out there, but he was not good. I would have gone with Harper in the centre, Simonson on the wing. And so it just comes back to my point being that this is the sort of loss where you're going to have fans saying that Brad Arthur needs to be sacked. You're going to have fans saying that X player needs to be sacked, or that whoever's on the recruitment retention needs to be sacked. The reality is that it's no singular entity's fault. They all need to step up to the plate now, because otherwise this season's just going to get tanked.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair call to make as well, because what we're seeing is it basically looks like in the last 2 weeks that the Eels have gone from being a team, a first grade team that was huge on effort, huge, and composed. And within, like, that composure had been like an absolute standout across those first 3 rounds. And it's like the absence of Moses has triggered a complete breakdown. And it shouldn't come down to a single player being missing, that all of a sudden you've got a whole group of players who can't be focused for 80 minutes. Well, that focus was missing well and truly within the first half, so it's not as if they clocked off at a certain time. And the other point is, and this is not being disrespectful to the Raiders, but they just got spanked by a Raiders team who gave up an 18-point lead against the Sharks last week.
Collapsed embarrassingly against Cronulla.
Yeah.
But not as embarrassing as how the Eels collapsed this week.
Oh, well, look, I don't even know if we can use the word collapse, because if you actually aren't part of the contest from very early on, then it almost comes down to the cliche of we didn't turn up. And I'm sorry, you can't use that. We're recording this without listening to anything that's said at the presser, but you can't even use the we didn't turn up cliche, because it's, those sorts of cliches. I no longer accept it, because especially on the back of what we saw last week, what supporters were looking for, and let us tip our hat to all the supporters who made the 3.5-hour drive or longer, depending where they were travelling from, down to Canberra today. We're watching it from home and commenting on this. There are people, and we know some of the people that were down there. Shout out to Ham, for example. Shout out to Joey Grimer, who had travelled down there. So there were people down there at the game who put in all day to be part of offering their support and showing their support for the club and the players, and they deserve better than what was dished up today. You can accept a team that gives their all and they're not good enough on the day. I don't think they gave their all today.
No,
and
they gave half their all.
And you know what? Even if, and people will criticise this sort of comment when it's made, when BA will say, oh, look, there was effort today. Let's distinguish between effort and not playing with any football smarts as well, or not being focused. Because what we saw out there today was a team that looked completely unfocused. Completely unfocused. So I don't even know if I want to go. I don't know if we necessarily go down the path of no effort that was being put in. What I'm quite happy to put down is almost feeling like there was zero focus out there. And maybe zero is a big number to pull out, but if you've got fundamentals that go missing, that's where this happens. And we saw it time and again in the red zone today, where the ball was just put down for, and not even what you'd call any pressure. We saw it with Woody in his early stint, where the Eels had possession, and what was it, about the second tackle or something like that, when
tackle 2,
the ball was going. Yeah. Then we saw it, I think, on tackle 1 with Luca, and it was just a straightforward pass to him.
He did the same last week too, I think, actually.
Yeah. So it's, they're just basics. They're
it's not even
fundamental.
attention to detail, is it? It's like,
no,
it's things that you should be taking for granted in rugby league, because it is such a core aspect of the game. Just catch the ball.
Yeah. Now, we're not players. We're not out there under the pressure that the players are under or anything like that. But if people like you and I are watching the game and we see an incident like what happened with where Gutho lost the ball and it came off the head of one of the Raiders defenders, and you said, and rightly so, this is where you just tuck it under the arm and take the tackle, because it was as plain as anything that the ref had missed a knock on. And there was no way that a try was going to be cleared at that point. And you called it straight away. As I was watching the game as well, I'm calling out of the TV, take the tackle. And as I said, we're not out there under the pressure of a game or playing in the moment where, maybe there's instances like that where it hasn't been a knock on, and if you've got an opportunity to score that you should, but it looked pretty obvious to laymen like us watching the game, and you just wonder how it is that footballers in those moments don't think, I better just take the tackle. It just, as I said, for me, there just wasn't any focus in the performance. Now, the other part of it that I've also touched on is that we're not in the contest as I said before, we're not in the contest when it comes to the pace of our backs. Like, we are seriously out of the contest in that regard. And even more so with Mitch Moses out, because Mitch Moses is one of the fastest players in the Eels team. If not over 100 metres, it's certainly the case over about 15, 20 metres, which gets him through the line. Now, as soon as he's out of the team, we've got even less pace. And people don't appreciate as well the job that he does in defence, because Mitch Moses went from a much maligned defender to a strong defender, one of the best halves defenders in the NRL.
Yeah, and in his place, Blazer's copying his rookie lumps in that regard. He's trying to get his body there, but he's not been able to affect tackles the way Mitchell can down that right edge.
Exactly. But we have to keep coming back to the fact that the Eels rely on playing a forward dominant game, and if the forwards aren't delivering, then we're in trouble. And unfortunately, the forwards didn't deliver. They haven't delivered the last 2 weeks, and this is a great concern, because if we've got other teams that are winning the middle, that are winning the yardage, and then they're able to spread that ball because they've earned the right to spread the ball, we're in trouble. Like, we're being done for pace so easily. And it doesn't matter what sort of defensive system you've got if players are able to get around their opposite and cut through the line. And what makes it harder is when you've got edge players that are also missing their tackles. Or what we ended up seeing today, where everyone was missing tackles just about.
Well, there was that one run by Tomoko where I think the entire left edge and the entire middle all had to go and missed him, and led to the try to, what was it, Hudson Young.
Yeah. So this week, I don't know what the team does, but this week is Old Boys Day. And they're going to be taking the field against the team that's sitting up at the top of the ladder in the Cowboys, who have been playing good football. And this is a special day every year for the former players. And the current players, they're going to need to find something, because if the Raiders are going to dismantle us by that sort of score today, I hate to think what's going to happen in some of the following weeks. I fear for what's going to happen. In our preview, mate, I said to you about, because we had that discussion, didn't we, about tipping with the head and the heart. And I said to you, if I was to tip with fear, that a performance that was the equivalent of the game against the Tigers would result in us copping off thrashing. And, I mean, talk about fear realised. It was worse than the game against the Tigers. So much worse. I mean, we were clunky against the Tigers, but that first half, the completion rate in that first half when we had opportunities in the red zone was diabolical. I mean, we didn't even give ourselves time to be clunky. The ball was just going down. Yeah. Look, I guess there's going to be, as you said, there's going to be plenty of players, plenty of supporters out there who are going to be calling for heads to roll.
I mean,
they're going to be.
This is a sort of effort where it's hard to argue against them, and I know that you can talk big picture and the relative success we've had, but yeah, it is hard to. I mean, you're not salvaging anything from this loss. Like you don't look at this result and say, well, this guy played okay, so I guess it means we can build on that. No one played good tonight. Like it was just a catastrophic result. So I don't know. Like
the trouble is, right? You've got. Sorry, excuse me. There was the odd player out there who didn't deserve to be in a team that was losing by that amount. And you could see, now, look, if I was to perhaps single out Gutho and Dylan for a start, right? Dylan's effort out there and Gutho's effort out there, I'm not going to fault their effort and their effort plays.
No, and like Dylan was, I mean, I imagine the poor kid was exhausted from constantly playing cover defender for the right edge, every other set defensively, but he also took bad options. And I know there's always talk about him taking control of the team, and that was my concern, Sixties, was it'll get into his head and take away from his own strengths, and that's why I was advocating for, in our preview, for the team, creating Mitchell Moses in the aggregate and not placing it entirely in the hands of Dylan Brown, because he was in his own head here. Like, he was overthinking stuff, wasn't playing natural football, and yeah.
And you know what? If people saw BA's press conference from the captain's run, he literally said the same thing. He said that Dylan was critical of himself and the amount of times that he ran last week. And he said, we don't want Dylan to stop being Dylan. And when we did the video analysis and showed him that, the point to get across to him was that there were others who had to step up. It wasn't that he was dangerous every time he carried the ball. He was a threat every time he carried the ball. And there should have been things built from those carries. And what you saw tonight, as you said, was a player who maybe pulled back on how often he ran, but the amount of work that he was trying to do, especially in defence and covering for people on that side of the field, it was, as I said, and what ends up happening in games like that is when you've got people that are trying to do their work and perhaps the work of others, sometimes it ends up looking like they're making more mistakes than other people, whereas they're simply trying to involve themselves and trying to shut things down as much as they possibly can. And I'm not saying this as a defense of players that shouldn't be, to say they shouldn't be criticised, but, when you've got a game like that tonight where performance levels were down by so many, nobody is going to look good. I mean, we can't do a 3-2-1 tonight. We can't at all. I mean, and I'll say this straight out, and I don't know what's going to happen, but I sent a message to Goal and I said, mate, I don't even know if you should bother with putting in the effort to submit a grades this week. Because the bottom line is, it should basically be saying that this performance was an F performance, and that aspect of it is, we should. I don't want us to put up a post that is as brief and as short as that, and has sponsors attached to it. And I think anyone would understand that, because that becomes disrespectful to sponsors. So we're going ahead with our instant reaction, and people can hear now how critical we are of the team. And if people want to vent on this post. But, I mean, look, Gold might go ahead and write a grades. I'm just letting people know straight out. I've said to him that I didn't think that the game was worthy of the effort that he goes into and would be going into late on a Sunday night. And let's put that in perspective, late on a Sunday night to write something up. It's not worth the effort. It really isn't. And all I would suggest to people as well is, and people know this, do not dare get personal with players about this. Do not cross any lines. Because if you cross lines, it'll just be deleted. Or anything within the comment that is a personal comment will get deleted. So let's just, keep it as criticism of performance, not criticism of that's personal. But by all means, there are personal there are performance criticisms that are deserved after this. And let's talk about John, because there's no point in analysing this. We just weren't in the contest in any. There wasn't a category where you'd say we were in the contest. There wasn't any sort of aspect of the game where we were in the contest here. So we can leave that there. What we can talk about is there an opportunity to make changes? And if so, what would they be? Because I'm going to float something to you. I don't think the team is capable of playing without a halfback. And I think that the form of Ethan Sanders up to last week hadn't warranted first grade selection. But even though his team has continued to lose, I'd be tempted to play him this week for the sake of having another kicking option and someone who is a recognised halfback in the team.
I mean,
do you think that's an outrageous call, given that
I
the
wouldn't
team
say
is
it's outrageous. I think there is merit to the idea, to the methodology about the Eels needing someone that can take a bit more control of the team and put them in tempo and on time to whatever the game plan is in a given week. And if you're talking about a halfback, that Ethan would be the only viable option in that regard. I would be concerned in that he had struggles across the first month of New South Wales Cup and the trial against the Canberra Raiders with the speed and tempo of the game at that level. And he'd be coming into a team where, if the team had been winning and Mitchell Moses drops out and you bring him in and plug him in, I feel like it's a different vibe, a different environment. But he's coming into a team that's now desperate, and it's going to be an extra degree of responsibility on him, but maybe that'll be the making of him. I am completely okay if, whether it's a fan or a coach, going back to the drawing board and taking a different approach to next week up against a pretty good team in the North Queensland Cowboys. And maybe they do need to get more of a conventional halfback into the squad. And then, that lets you tweak the back line in different ways too. If you want to give Bryce Talangi a rest, you can do that. You can put him into the centres and then push Bailey Simons into the wing in that regard too. Or bring Morgan Harper in too. So I think there's at least a string of coherency there that could end up going into a full yarn or a ball there. I'm not sure. I don't know.
No, I don't know either. And I mean, I was throwing that out there simply from the perspective of it's almost like our team, like the rest of the team, has not adjusted to having two 5'8" out there. And this, by the way, this isn't a criticism of Blaze in any way, because my thought would be what you just suggested, which is Blaze returns to the centre and Bailey Simonson goes to the wing. And
I would be open to it in the sense too that we obviously struggle for points or consistency for points without Moses here to pull the strings, and you can't have Dylan Brown being scared to run the ball on tackles 4 and 5 if it means he's not going to be available to kick the ball on the last. And if having Sanders there means that the team is more confident to let Dill run the ball and play to his strengths, and then have Sanders take over and do the clearing kick or the attacking kick, there's definitely merit in that. Obviously, the flip side to that is that you're going to be tasking a young half with a very difficult defensive responsibility at halfback. And Blaze, who is, was a good defender coming through the junior reps, he's getting, like I said, he's taking his lumps in defense in the NRL because that's just how fast and physical the game is at, first grade level. But again, you can't keep running it back and expect things to change. And the Eels, they need to get as many wins under their belt as they can while Mitchell Moses is out, because it's going to, at this rate, it's going to end up the same as last season, but obviously postponed by about a month, where the Eels started 0-3 and couldn't make up the ground. We had a much better start this year, but now with the injuries and the issues on the field, we're going to put ourselves so far behind the 8 ball that it's going to be nearly impossible to make up by the time Mitch is back.
Well, I'm looking at what lies ahead, and I'm trying to avoid being pessimistic, but it's hard not to be. Like, it really is hard not to be, because the 2 games that we've just lost were winnable games without Moses. The ask beyond these 2 weeks is a far tougher proposition. And I fear what certain opponents might be able to do against the Eels if the Eels play similar to what we've seen in the last 2 weeks. And you have to look at that and go, we're seeing certain patterns in the last 2 weeks that are evident of a slide in concerning aspects like fundamentals, like focus, like physicality, the things that the Eels would normally base their football on, and it's sadly lacking. So look, I really don't know that there's too much more that we can say at this point. I mean, the bottom line is as well, there just aren't selection options for Brad. I mean, I just said to you, would it be completely out of consideration for the selection of Ethan Sanders? And I'm thinking that really it needs far more than that. But I don't see that.
I mean,
there are options outside of it, because really, John, that you'd want to make changes to the forwards based on today.
That's really what upsets me, 60s, is that we've spoken about the issues in the back line ad nauseum. Like, it is clear that we don't have the talent and the depth in the backs that we should. Okay, you cop that on the chin and make what you can out of it. The Parramatta forward pack is meant to be the crown jewel of the team. It's meant to be the best in the competition. They cannot have games like this where they get completely rolled by a Canberra pack missing their captain, Elliot Whitehead. Like, I get that you're on the road, it's cold, it's tough, but we've got too many highly paid players in the forward pack for this to happen. You cannot be rolled the way we get rolled in a game like this.
Yeah. It was. I mean, when it came to effort plays, I guess someone like Jermaine, you had to have him up there as saying, okay,
honestly, I look at this game, the only starter I will actually, give a little check of approval to in any capacity would be Jermaine Hopgood. And even then, he forced a pass that, led to a turnover. But in the context of actual effort plays, yeah, Jermaine. And after that, maybe Joe. Defensively, I'm trying to think of any. He might have been part of the Tomoko break as well, but he's only had 2 missed tackles to his name, which in the context of this game is okay. But yeah, that starting pack, it's not good enough. Like when your halfback is out, you talk about creating the difference in the aggregate or replacing Moses in the aggregate. Your forwards need to be on their top game. They weren't even near their top game. They were so far from it that it was embarrassing today. So, yeah. It's and on top of that, I thought Joey Lussick was very ordinary dummy half too. He was throwing some poor passes, made some bad defensive reads. Did get through a mountain of tackles still, which I suppose the argument would be he got through too much. He's applying himself too much defensively and needs to better pace himself on that side of the ball in order to keep him sharp, both in defense and offense. I don't know. This is the sort of game where this might just me being almost like a bully and picking on guys because the entire team failed. So maybe I'm being too harsh on specific players here, and in the wake of the review, it's going to be different guys that deserve to be criticised more so than others. But this is the sort of result where I think you can pick on pretty much anyone. Maybe not Bailey Simonson, maybe not Jermaine, but anyone else, and just say, why was Reg losing his head in the last 10 minutes? Now he's going to be facing potential suspension charges. That's your senior starting prop forward there. I know he he is the enforcer, but you can't. What is the point of enforcing when you're down 35 points with a couple minutes to go? Pick your fights. Likewise for any number of our senior players that just aren't putting their fingers or pulling their fingers out and making the efforts requisite for their payroll.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, mate, I don't know about you, but I'm just about done. I don't think there's any.
I can't believe we talked as much as we did. We could have signed off after 2 minutes, to be honest. Have been having put in as much effort as the boys tonight. So
what have we come in at
over 40 minutes, which is unbelievable, given that we told ourselves this was going to be a 15-20 minute podcast. But
yeah, look, I honestly expected we were going to go for about 20, because to be fair, that was really all I felt like I could talk about, because I felt it was just going to be so negative, and I'm fully expecting that the replies to the post, to the podcast when it's posted, are going to be full of vitriol. And again, I just want to emphasize, do not make anything personal. I get the anger. I get the upset. Anyone that thinks that we don't get angry or upset doesn't understand that we're just supporters like everyone else. We're not devoid of feeling the emotion. It's we feel as much pain as any other supporter that would. And in fact, as I said at the start of this, I feel for those supporters who made the trek down to Canberra. I take my hat off to you for making a hike that is probably between 6 and 7 hours worth of travel on the road for this game. And you deserve better today. That's all I'll say. So, mate, I think that's probably where we should wrap things up.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, we spoke about 20 minutes longer than I thought we would. Eels absolutely pants by the Raiders this week. If you made the trip like 60 said, well done, you psychopaths. You deserve better. If you watch it like me at home, you still deserve better. So on to next week with the North Queensland Cowboys coming to town. Like you mentioned, 60s, it's old boys week. If they don't turn up for that one, then I'm not sure when they're going to turn up. So we move on to hopefully greener pastures next week. And, of course, TCT will be there for all your news, previews, and everything in between.
Of course, thank you to Big Swing Golf at Northmead and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. You deserve a more upbeat podcast, but we thank you for your support. And, look, it's not quite as easy to say this, but I'll say it in advance for next week. Go you mighty Eels.